And that was a big impact when people do that. I never even saw him again. There was nothing in it for him. There was no instrumentalization involved. He wasn't some creep who wanted to take advantage of us. He was just doing a good thing. And it was that gratuitousness that really had an amazing impact.
This is a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Blom, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen. Good day, everybody. This is another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. And as always, I'm delighted with today's guest who will introduce herself. Julie, please go ahead.
Hi, Maurice. Thank you. My name's Julie Clague, everyone. Hi. And if you're wondering about this accent, it's because I'm from England and I was brought up in the north of England in a small town called Blackburn. Now possibly struggling a little bit from post-industrialisation. So I'm from Lancashire. But my ancestors are from Ireland. So
okay.
That's my true genetic identity.
Yeah, and you're sitting in front of a picture, I guess, but what is the picture from where?
I'd like to say it was my back garden, but the truth is it's the cloisters where I work at the University of Glasgow. So you can see the quadrangle there and the cloisters. Okay. So this is a 19th century design by Gilbert Scott, and it's based on a hill high up looking over Glasgow.
Great. And it's good that you actually describe it because, people are not able to see it. I am able to see it. But so Julie, tell a bit about your upbringing and it ultimately brought you to where you are today.
Oh, wow, where to begin? I was adopted when I was a small baby. So I always kind of knew that. Only in recent times have I managed to connect with my birth families over in Ireland. So that was very profound experience. But I had an enormously happy upbringing, a very loving family, with a brother and two sisters as well. So there's four of us, and two of us are adopted and two of us aren't. So that's a kind of interesting story, but it wasn't really a defining thing for my childhood. We lived very, very close to my relatives. So I was very, very aware of an extended family. I lived next door to a grandmother and uncle, and another set of grandparents were a stone's throw away. We all lived within a 2 stones throw of our local church, where everyone had been baptized and married. So there's obviously a family with very small horizons. They're still largely based in that part of the world. So maybe I was the one that moved away and did stuff. The kind of upbringing I had was a Catholic one, very devout, not strict, but devout. And therefore, the kind of education I got was a Catholic education. So that, I think, was quite formative for me, the faith experience. And also, there was a very strong emphasis on social justice. And I think that's run through. There was also because I had such a very kind and loving upbringing that I think has shaped me. And those ideas of compassion and charity that perhaps are some of the foundational things that faith-based organizations are motivated by. I'm quite sure that my upbringing had a major influence on my commitment to try to be part of that work with faith-based organizations for transformative justice in the globe.
Yeah, fascinating, Julie. I have two quick questions. So, so I understand that your religious upbringing, probably influenced in the direction that you went, but your first study had nothing to do with it, isn't it? So that's a question that I have, and then the other question is, what about your siblings? In which direction did they go?
Okay, interesting questions. So, in terms of studies, I first of all had very conventional co-educational experience in what are called comprehensive schools. So they're not fee-paying, and they're mixed, boys and girls. So that was my experience. I then went to university, studied chemistry at university, and then got into the world of theology later on after a period teaching. So my educational background, I guess you could call it, in science and also in the humanities, specifically theology and religious studies. My other family members have gone in various directions. One of the people is a nurse and is very engaged in the kind of caring professions. My other sister drives and works as part of the Royal Mail. My brother works for a design company, and he works in the IT software side of things.
Oh, that's interesting that you went different ways. I still have a question about, then your choice to study chemistry, right?
Yeah, well, it's difficult when you're kind of, yeah, I could do that stuff. I don't know why I went in that direction now.
Okay.
In retrospect, I thought maybe I would change and do medicine or theology, and I ended up going down the theology route eventually.
Okay. Well, fascinating. Yeah, so when you decided to study theology, what were you expecting from that? You start, and did you already have an idea of, okay, then when I'm done, I will go this direction, or no?
I'm just such a hopeless planner. I'm really so very
I can totally relate with that, so no worries. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So
exactly, I feel rather like that. I did this degree in science, and I love teaching science. So I was teaching in a secondary school environment and teaching religious education, incidentally, at the same time. They were very keen for non-specialists to teach because I don't think they had enough specialists. But at the end of a period, I thought I wanted to go and teach overseas, and I thought I could teach science in that context. It was very inspiring to be able to, for example, enable girls to get into science. I felt very passionate about that. And so I felt this calling to maybe go on voluntary service overseas or one of these other organizations. So I was intending to do that. And then an important priest in my life, who was a curate at the parish that I attended, told me about this college called Heathrow College in the University of London, which I'd never heard of. It's a Jesuit-run college. And he said, why don't you go and study theology there? And so I resigned from my job and went and did a little diploma there, thinking that that would be something I'd do for a year and then get on with my life. But somehow it got its claws into me, and I never really moved away. So that was a really very transformative experience for me, to meet like-minded people with a commitment to learning more about their faith. You see, in Catholicism, very often, although there's this sacramental program for kiddies that help them try to understand more about their faith commitment, it sort of stops when you get to the teenage years and you don't really get any more input. And so exactly at the time when you're asking questions and wanting to understand more about the way in which this divine being relates to humanity in all its diversity, you have to try to work out some of those questions and answers for yourself. So I was greatly helped by studying theology, which really enabled me and empowered me, I suppose, to first of all understand more about my faith and the ins and outs of it, and also begin to think critically about faith. So that was a sort of adult education moment, you might say, but it was also inspiring because from a vocational aspect then, I saw that I could maybe use my teaching skill sets in a way that could communicate that to a wider audience. And that's, I guess, what I tried to do in my teaching and writing.
Okay. I have a, because, you know, I have a, or I, this podcast has a very diverse audience, you know, not necessarily people from with a faith background, so all kinds of backgrounds. So when I was listening, I've never asked this, but I'm asking you to kind of unpack, to explain what this means for you when you say this. You mentioned, you know, about a calling. What is that?
Good question.
How does that work?
Usually a wrong number, I think. Reverse the charges. So what do I mean by that? I guess, you know, as we're kind of thinking, what are our skill sets and why are we on this crazy planet, and what can we bring to the table rather than just be passive recipients of all of this amazing stuff that we get from other people, like love from our families or education from our teachers. And so once we finish a world of just gobbling up all this free stuff we get from people around us, you sort of think, actually, maybe I could be that kind of person. And so it's not exactly a payback time, but you begin to recognize that you are being inspired to live a particular kind of way and according to a particular set of values. These aren't necessarily religious values, they're just the way in which people begin to do a bit of introspection and discover who they are, what their skill sets are, what they're good at, maybe what their flaws are, and to try to be their better person and aim in that direction. So of course this isn't, well, it's theology and philosophy, you know, it's what the great philosophers have been talking about, how should we live? And therefore, in response to the how should we live question, there's the what I perhaps expressed in terms of a calling, but it's really a response, or it's scratching the itch that says something about what we want to be, but also what we want to leave behind. So, you know, life isn't a dress rehearsal, and although we keep fouling up and making the same mistakes over and over again as well, there's also, in a kind of inspirational way, a part of us that maybe we see only in shade and shadow and incompletely, but we also see that in each of us there's an amazing power to transform other people, and that we can have an effect on people and places and times. Yes, I mean, small ways that we make people smile, maybe when we smile to them on the underground or something, you know, very simple. But once you're the recipient of that, I think that's what makes the difference. You know, this isn't necessarily that we meet God in some theophanous cloud or burning bush, you know. We're unlikely to have that kind of experience in our lives. We, in fact, encounter what we see as something above and beyond our human knowing in and through others. And that is the transformative power that we have on one another, sometimes unwittingly even. I remember one of the people perhaps who's had an impact on me in that regard is someone I don't even know the name of. I was hitchhiking around Europe with a friend, and it was a man in Belgium. He picked us up in his car and he just drove us through Belgium to wherever we were going. We didn't even really have a desired direction. He dropped us off at this place. And en route, he bought us some breakfast because it was some early in the morning ferry we'd arrived on stupidly from Europe, not even imagining we might need money for Belgium because we just imagined we were heading elsewhere, you know. And he just gave us some money for our journey. And a few pounds, you know, or francs as they were then. And it was a case of, and that was just so profound that he was a kind of guardian angel person who thought, you know, these idiot kids, let's make sure they're going to be okay. And that was a big impact when people do that. I never even saw him again. There was nothing in it for him. There was no instrumentalization involved. He wasn't some creep who wanted to take advantage of us. He was just doing a good thing. And it was that gratuitousness that really had an amazing impact.
So yeah, thanks, Julie. What I would like to ask you is, you know, if I would go to your students and ask them, you know, what type of lecturer, what type of teacher is Julie, what do you hope that they will say?
I hope they'd say she's caring, that she gives a damn, and that perhaps in some weird way she said something, perhaps only in passing, that made them think twice. Most of the students I teach at undergraduate level are not going to be studying theology and religion beyond level 1 or maybe level 2. In the Scottish educational system, students in first year, for example, if they came in trying to study English literature, they'd have to do some other subjects in addition. And very often theology, religion is their second or third subject. But hopefully they begin to see that this mad, crazy world of religion is fascinating, diverse, and challenging. So that's one thing I try to do. So hopefully we expand the way they think about religion in all its diversity and religious experience, the art, the creativity, not just the toxicity that can accompany religions. And I suppose, I hope they think, yeah, she's a kind teacher primarily, because very often the students are maybe lacking confidence or they are struggling in some way. A lot of our students have mental health or other challenges, issues that they're working with, and being able to be there for them and help them connect to things that are going to help them make their next steps. That's the thing I think primarily that I can do for them. So it's not about pouring, you know, content into empty jugs, far from it. In a certain sense, the content we deliver is only part of, and not the most important part of what we're trying to do. Most of the students I teach, or at least a lot of my time, is spent on doctoral students, research students. So that's been a very profound encounter for me to come into contact with some really impressive people that are doing amazing work. You know, they're very often mature students. They've got a job already. They're doing stuff in the real wide world, and they're coming with all of that skill set and knowledge to try to then reflect on that as reflective practitioners and do a piece of research related to it. So that's been very inspiring as well. So, I mean, I could give you some examples of some of those students, you know, a priest from Sierra Leone, for instance, working on environmental concern, looking at how in his own community climate change is having devastating effects on the people, and very often they're oblivious to that, and also don't know ways that they can make change happen in their locale. So his research was looking into that, or working with people who have worked at Caritas Internationalis on questions of integral human development, for instance, or someone looking at Pentecostal communities in Tanzania and how COVID was affecting them. The list goes on. They're extraordinary and remarkable people, and I'm really privileged to be able to work with them.
Okay. So, yeah, what I wanted to ask you, if, because you have been teaching for quite a while, is the student of 2025, different than, let's say, a decade ago?
A good question. And I think technology's moved on in that time. So they can access a lot of the material we want to present to them online. And so I don't think they're all in a hurry to attend 9 o'clock lectures like they used to have to. They're also in Scotland, they're more passive when they come in. Very often they're only 17 or 18 years of age. They're quite young compared to some of the English students I used to teach. So their experience is slightly more local, parochial. A lot of the Scottish students go to Glasgow University because they live with their parents in Glasgow. That's also quite an interesting experience. So over time, we've seen how COVID affected them. And perhaps maybe one other way I'd point to, and that is the way in which social media and other technologies are helping them to create new spaces for change. So I think that's an interesting thing. Before my time of teaching, when folk used to teach in the 60s and 70s, and the students were revolting or protesting, there was a pushing against the establishment and wanting to make the establishment change, a politicized kind of student body. We don't get that anymore. It's a more, it looks a more passive thing, a more indifferent kind of student body, although the Gaza situation has changed that, and we have had protests on campus more recently because of the Israel, Middle East, Gaza situation. But on the whole, you don't get that degree of activism. Instead, what you, I think, get is the way in which they're creating spaces and communities and groups of change. They're not using the existing unjust structures or political structures and working through them for change. They're just creating new ones, and maybe being more, recognizing the difficulty in changing these complex structures that we all inhabit. We live in very complicated institutional frameworks, which are sort of labyrinths, you might say, and too big for any one person to fix and change. So you've got these sort of structural flaws in all of the social and institutional bodies we create. And I think the students are very aware of the way in which it's very difficult to make change happen in those complex worlds that we
So can you give an example of something that they have created or are creating, that new structure or new entity?
Yeah, I think so. Well, for instance, the students I know have been active in trying to create additional sort of social media or magazine kind of forms of communication beyond what currently exists. They're trying to make changes happen in their own church structures. For example, one of the students we had who was also training to be a minister in the Church of Scotland created a new way of being church, which is for people who are autistic. And that's become very popular in Scotland and is going more global than just beyond that small community, because people have seen that it's answering a need. So it was spotting a kind of flaw in the way people were making church, and that it was in some ways unwittingly exclusionary and creating a space whereby change could happen. So those kind of things are often very, very inspiring, where people are spotting what's not working in the current framework and then what they can do to try to make a change happen.
Okay. So Julie, that's actually fascinating. I mean, you have a specific class that you're teaching, so you are discussing with your students, of course, about, you know, religion and spirituality. Have you seen their change in terms of, you know, how they look and how they perceive religion and or spirituality? That's question one. And then related with that, you told us that, okay, they might be more passive than, you know, past generation, especially in terms of protests, etc., or they have found different ways. Can you share a little bit about any discussions that you have at the moment? Because a lot is happening in the world. So I have two things that I hope you can touch upon.
So maybe the first thing to say is that teaching in a secular university is a situation where most of the students that we encounter are not religious. But they might be curious or questioning or recovering from what they have experienced as a toxic experience of religion. So the way in which the students approach the subject is very often as either an interested outsider or someone who's dissatisfied with the way in which either institutional religion has power in society and wants to kind of not be associated with that, critique it potentially for some of the toxic ways, and therefore their spirituality is of the I'm not religious but I'm spiritual variety, most usually, and generally questioning and open. And also in a live and let live way, they're beyond issues such as sectarianism. I mentioned that because in Scotland, in the west of Scotland, rather like what we are familiar with in the Irish situation, there have been historical tensions between the Protestant and the Catholic communities, and historical discrimination, fights. It sort of still lives on in a sort of tribal way through the football clubs in Glasgow, Glasgow Rangers and Celtic. So you have that kind of history of tribalism and sectarianism, but the students are so not like that for the most part. That would be rare to see people owning those historical tribal differences between religions. So it's of a live and let live kind of religious pluralism that I think that most students would feel very happy with, or an inclusiveness at least. It's very rare we get a religious exclusionism or exclusivity that says, you know, my religion is the best and yours is no good. It's more likely to be people seeing that there are pathways and ways of being and relating to oneself, one another, and to the creation, our world, our universe, and to whatever we call or understand the divine to be, ways of relating that are very inclusive, and to see that we're all on a pathway. So that's also an interesting change, and maybe different from the US system, where still perhaps a lot of the schools, seminaries, colleges are denominational and perhaps therefore to some extent not being, if you might say, fertilized by the rich soil of an ecology, a very diverse ecology of experience. So we've got a lot of international students as well, you see, who come with their own approaches and understandings. So we're in a very, very privileged environment in a university setting, because it is rather universal in its approach and openness. So it's a very healthy place to be able to ask some of these big questions.
Yeah, Julie, tell me a bit about what type of discussions you have at the moment with your students. You know, considering there's a lot going on. I mean, you alluded already to Gaza, but you know, we have Ukraine, the environment, planets. Yeah, what are the students talking with you about?
They were very taxed last year by the whole debate about abortion in the USA and the Dobbs ruling. We analysed that quite a lot from the perspective of data about the role of Christian organisations, the different Christian denominations, to see the diverse approaches to abortion being taken in the USA by, you know, the Pentecostal community, the Catholics, the Episcopalians. You know, the differences are interesting to analyse and to try to understand. And of course, the gender issues that loom large. So those are concerns that the students have. In Scotland at the moment, there's again a debate going on about assisted dying, because and of course in Westminster also, in the UK more broadly, a bill is looking like it's making its way through the Commons to allow assisted dying in certain circumstances. So that's, again, an issue that mobilises and interests the students. In both cases, the default mode for the students in the classes tends to be the free choice of the individual, autonomy being important, and using that then to be in favour of change in assisted dying and being in favour of abortion provision. So that's a kind of default mode. Not every student has that perspective, but it's a predominant, a prevailing view. So these are interesting things. And I mean, more broadly, we talk about, yes, the war in Ukraine. We're looking at the situation, for instance, about how Christianity affects politics in the USA, which is, of course, in a much more overt way than exists in Europe more generally. So we look at ideas of secularization, of course.
So what is interesting, you mentioned a couple of times that they are looking what is happening in the US, while, you know, you're teaching in on the other side of the pond. So there, I mean, the US seems to have still a big influence on, you know, what students think about and what worries them, right? So yeah. So when you were talking about that, you know, you think like the majority of the students would tend to leaning towards more, you know, the choice of the individual. Is that also the case because you have a lot of foreign students from outside of Europe as well? Is that the same, or that it's more nuanced? How is that?
It doesn't appear to be so. It doesn't appear to be so. Instead, what one might get are very devout students coming from a particular religious perspective that would then be, on the basis of their faith perspective, coming up with, you know, something that would be in line with what their churches teach on these issues, that would be perhaps more restrictive. And so that's also, of course, good and interesting. And we, you know, we're not trying to make people think any particular thing. We're trying to get them to explore the issues and to understand better what's at stake.
Mm. Okay. I'm going to take you back to, your guardian angel that you met.
Mhm.
Maybe you can compare it with what I've called, when I talked with my guests, about a simple act of kindness, and a potential to have a ripple effect. Yeah, when was the last time you were a guardian angel for somebody else?
Well, good question. I suppose if I'm a guardian angel at all, the one I'm guarding, particularly at this present time, is my mother, who's rather old and frail and has bits and pieces falling off her and things wrong with her a lot. So she's the person I look out for and guard, and can transform, make her life feel more worth living, because there's somebody around living with her who can help her to get from A to B and do all that kind of stuff. So I'm a sort of taxi driver and a daughter and you name it, a secretary working out the appointments, financial advisor, etc. Yeah. So that's an interesting one.
Yeah,
That's probably the most obvious example I can give you.
Okay. Julie, this podcast is a spin-off of a 100-mile walk that I started in 2011, 2012 to raise awareness. I walked 100 miles in a week, so 15 to 20 miles per day, to raise awareness around hunger, poverty, and injustice. And then, during COVID, I was still walking, but I could not be accompanied by other people. So that's why I started this virtual walk. My question that I have for my guests is, if you would be asked to walk 100 miles in a week, for which cause, for what, what's the reason, why would you do it?
Yeah, good question. There are a few causes I could name, I guess. I do it for CAFOD, a development agency that I've been working with for some time. And I do that because that organization has opened my eyes to the questions of development, the Sustainable Development Goals, issues of gender in relation to development, and issues, of course, it's come back with the dissolving of PEPFAR recently, the plight of people living with HIV/AIDS. And I think that kind of work is the stuff I would feel committed to. And I've been walking with them on that journey for a number of years already, from their theological reference group, so-called, working on that, and their HIV advisory group. So I suppose that would be one obvious thing. And beyond that, yeah, JLI, why not? The Joint Learning Initiative. I think that's something that's important and needs support from various different directions.
And that's how we actually got to know each other, through JLI. Can you explain, maybe, in 1 or 2 sentences to the audience, what is JLI about, and why do you think it's important, what they do?
Every time
what
I
we
try
do,
to
right?
Right, yeah. Every time I try to describe JLI, the sentence comes out differently. What is it trying to do? It's a partnership. It's a network. It's like-minded people from across a range of faith traditions. And what they're doing is working together with academics, with development practitioners, to get evidence and data about the role of faith-based groups in responding to the SDG agenda, and finding creative ways to do a better job at that, and trying to change the discourse, so that instead of it being a load of folk like me and you, sort of Europeans, thinking and doing about these things, that instead it all, the center of gravity heads south to where it needs to be. And therefore us being part of a conversation there about religious literacy and development literacy, helping to dissolve the myths about the role of religion, and to better equip people just in their communities, which in the global south tend to be religious communities, because most people down there are religious, about how they can change their lives for the better and overcome the unjust systems that keep working against them and the structural inequalities that wound us all. So it's trying to be part of figuring out ways of breaking down those unjust structures ultimately, which of course we do in partnership with any person who sees them as inherently unjust. It's not a religious pursuit, it's just stuff that all of us can do together. Yeah. I don't know. What is joint learning initiative? We are learning, but we're doing more than that. We're doing some kind of knowledge exchange. It's a joint learning. It's a two-way learning process to better equip people to work for the Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, you've been talking about the inner development goals, and I think that's, another way that helps us change the discourse to get beyond the impossible structures that one person can't overcome on their own, and instead to see that we can be the change, we can do stuff together. It'll be a small step, but it'll head us in the right direction.
Yeah, thanks, Julie, for that. And what you're alluding to, the Sustainable Development Goals, those are the goals that we as a world, actually, although not all the countries have signed on or are moving away from it, but we identified 17 goals to make this world more just and sustainable. We should reach them before 2030. We are only on average at 15 to 20%. The latest actions, are probably not helpful in trying to reach those goals. And then you were referring to the inner development goals because, growing up people said, in order for us to reach those goals, you need to look at the ability, skills, and knowledge that you need as an individual and as a community as well. We came up with 5 goals: being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting. And I think there also faith-based organizations have a lot of a role to play in trying to translate, being translator, being connector between the different groups of people that are out there and who are trying to work on it and don't necessarily know. Sometimes, they're having difficulty in talking with each other, right? Because they speak a different language or they have a different perspective, which is all fine. That should not be a problem. Often it becomes a problem, and then people, we have a lot of polarization going on instead of continue to talk and see where we can agree and where we can work together. So I'm really thankful that you're part of that particular community already for many years. Julie, what I hope is that this podcast is helping to connect people so that, they listen to different perspectives. I'm connecting you with, the listeners of the podcast. We are connected. I also want to connect you with the previous guest, and the previous guest is a question for you.
This is actually very, very simple. It's not, I feel bad because it's not about like how to change the world or, what my learning edge is. My other lifelong obsession is food. I always say that if this religious engagement and Islamic studies stuff doesn't work out, I'm going to try and go into the food industry in some way. And so I would love to ask your next guest, what is their favorite global cuisine and why?
Why? Okay. It's got to be Italian food. Why? Well, two things, because I lived in Italy for a while and because it's something I can try and do as well in my not very au fait manner. And I guess if I'm really honest, nothing beats toast and butter in any part of the world.
Okay. Your question for the next guest.
Oh, okay. Hold on. Let me think about this. I'd want to ask the guest, what is their most inspiring journey that they've had?
Okay. Yeah, the next question is, for some people, the most difficult question that I always ask. I like, music is very important to me. Going tonight to an older jazz concert. My birthday was in February, and I was so fortunate that I received, I think, 3 or 4 tickets to concerts. So I'm going to my 3rd concert tonight in, I think, 3 or 4 weeks. So the question that I have for you is, what if I ask you to come up with a song or a piece of music that best embodies, for a big part, what you are about? Which song or piece of music would it be, and why?
Yeah, that's the worst question you could have thrown at me, Maurice. How long have you got? That's not easy.
I have all the time of the world. I don't know if we will be able to, keep our listeners.
Oh, yikes. Okay, we've got something in the UK called Desert Island Discs, and the celebrities invited onto BBC Radio 4 to talk about Desert Island Discs at least get 10 records to choose as their favorites, not just one.
Well,
so
if you cannot
that's hard.
Choose one, you can choose 2 or 3.
I guess the kind of music that I keep returning to is inevitably Bach's Matthew Passion and Monteverdi's Vespers of 1610. I absolutely adore that. The Magnificat. So why would I love that piece of music? Because apart from the sublime mastery in the case of Monteverdi and J.S. Bach, you've got the story that it tells, and it's the story, the human story, the highs and the lows of humankind. So I suppose it's that uplifting music that takes me to another place, and something for every mood and every moment somewhere in those pieces of music. But in a more trite and humorous way, I guess I can't get away from John Lennon's "Life's What Happens to You While You're Busy Making Other Plans" in his song "Beautiful Boy," because I also am horribly aware that my to-do list keeps getting longer and very few items ever get ticked off. So life's what happens to you while you're busy making other plans.
That's great. Maybe that's a good song for everybody to listen to after they're finished listening to this particular episode. These conversations always go fast, Julie. I sent you actually quite a number of questions. But before I thank you, is there any question that I should have asked you, but I didn't ask you today?
I guess you could have asked me if I'm happy, and the answer is yes. Very unfulfilled, but happy, if I can put it that way. We achieve...
Why happy? Yeah, why happy and why unfulfilled?
Because life's good and we can find beauty and pleasure in all things, even amidst the heartbreak and the sadness. We sometimes can see those things as an opportunity to see human resilience and strength. Yeah, and even in the unjust structures, we are then challenged to say, challenged to say, we will fight this and we won't put up with it and we will band together and do something. So there's that amazing transformative power within each of us. If you wanted to coinily go and think about sort of Catholic Christian way of thinking about it, you might use the term a sacramental encounter, which is to say that in our encounters with one another, somehow and in some way that perhaps we're not even aware of, we are mediating something that's more than just the encounter itself. There's something, a plus factor, a wonderful plus factor that can build something new that wasn't there before, and that has the power to change the other person. Call it love, call it whatever you want, but yeah, that's why I'm happy.
Okay, actually, I should not say anything now. I should just close this. Thank you so much, Julie, and for who you are, what you do, and yeah, I really appreciate you are, also for JLI, really an important community member. So all the best, and I would really, for the listeners who are really interested, in some of the things that we have touched upon today. That Julie you have written also a lot. So they should check out some of your work. So I would really encourage people to do so. So thanks,
you,
Julie.
Maurice. It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.